Welcome to the City Club of Chicago. My name is Paul Green. Jay Doherty is not with us today. Something about electing someone governor. Tom Roser, of course, is not with us today. Something about electing someone pope. So we'll just muddle on without him. Let's get started because there was a little minor insurrection here, but Sergeant of Arms Mazer will be putting it down momentarily. Welcome again to the City Club. I think we're going to start. Everything is off the record unless you want to put it on the record, though we're filming it, so much for that theory. And so as we start, Irma Tranter, Friends at the Park, will be first, but before Irma, we introduce you, Senorina. Many people think the City Club is merely about politics and policy. I don't know how that could possibly be heard. I mean, anyone could even think of that, ponder such an imponderable like that. And that's hard-nosed, featuring sandbagging, unfair questions, and bias. These are rumors. Actually, the City Club is very much into the arts. We are a very cultured, humanist kind of organization that features poetry. Erato, the muse of poetry, is one of our symbols. In that vein, we introduce our speakers in the following manner. Check the iambic pentameter. Thank you, Mr. Manwith. Bear down, Irma Tranter. Make every suit clear the way to victory. Bear down, David Bahlman. Sue, 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 so fiercely. We'll never forget the way you thrilled conservation with your tree formation. Hold your applause to the end. I know many of you are thinking this is from Shelley or Keats. However, I will stop now because I see I've lost most of you before I started. On behalf of the City Club of Chicago, it's my pleasure to introduce Irma Tranter, Friends of the Park.
Good morning. I'd like to introduce, before I start, first, thank you for the opportunity to present our issues on the Soldier Field plan. But before we get into that, I'd like to introduce the chairman of the board of Friends of the Parks, Tom Sandberg, who's here. Tom. And we have a board member both from the City Club as well as a board member with Friends of the Parks, Kitty Kurth. Thanks for being here, all of you. The Soldier Field plan sailed through the veto session in Springfield 13 months ago. In a veto session, in 12 days, a plan was introduced, actually shot down once, and then reintroduced as an amendment to another bill to spend $600 million to build a brand new stadium within the historic walls of Soldier Field. That plan was opposed by Friends of the Parks and Landmarks Preservation and some others later on. It was opposed immediately as violating the Lakefront Protection Ordinance. As you know, and looking at the visuals there, and as you'll see through with architect John Benz's proposal in visuals here, the new stadium is a new stainless steel and glass structure, 16 stories above ground, which will tower 5 stories above the historic colonnades. The colonnades, the whole of Soldier Field that John Benz is lifting right now, the whole of Soldier Field is listed as a National Historic Monument. It is governed by the federal law by the National Park Service. The National Park Service has written a letter indicating that should that new stadium be built within the historic walls, the designation calling Soldier Field a National Historic Monument will be reversed. It will no longer be one of the few in the nation. Friends of the Parks went through all the processes, of course, but all of the approvals were given on this plan through the Chicago Plan Commission, the Park Board of Commissioners, the Illinois Sports Facilities Authority. Those approvals went ahead, and Friends of the Parks then had to take the only action that we could see to prevent this major destruction of a lakefront facility and the lakefront itself. The lakefront is a treasured district. It is governed by a lakefront protection ordinance that was passed in 1973 in order to protect its very uniqueness, its very historical character, and its cultural and recreational facets to this city. The only thing that we could see would be to file lawsuits. We filed 2 lawsuits. The first one is indicating that this stadium would violate the Lakefront Protection Ordinance. That lawsuit went to circuit court, and in November, the judge ruled against us. We have filed an appeal to the Illinois Supreme Court and are trying to expedite that case. The second lawsuit is an 11-count lawsuit. It's very broad. It challenges the legislation that was set up in Springfield in November 2000. Technical issues, violations of the Illinois Constitution, violations of the Public Trust Doctrine. We have a hearing on Thursday this week, the 20th. A different judge, Judge Madden, will be hearing this. This is not the final decision. It is the decision. Of course, the defendants are filed a motion to throw our suit out. But that hearing is coming this week. So that's where we are in the lawsuits. We believe our only recourse to prevent this desecration of the lakefront is in the courts right now. So we will be available, both David and Landmarks Preservation Council, who's been a fabulous ally and friend on this, is in on the lawsuits. They have filed an amicus brief with us. So we are in partnership on these, in court on this. So we will, both David and I, from Landmarks Preservation Council, will be available to answer questions on the plan, but we want to just give you the background and then introduce you to 2 architects who have been wonderful, both John Benz and Joe Antunovich, who will do some presentations about an alternative location for a new state-of-the-art stadium for the Bears. I do want to make it clear, Friends of the Parks is not opposed to a new stadium. We are opposed to a new stadium on Chicago's lakefront. There are plenty of areas that will not be harmed and indeed would benefit by a new stadium in terms of economic development. And that's one of the that's one discussion we'll have with John Benz's presentation. And until you have questions, I'll introduce David Bahlman, who's the president of Landmarks Preservation Council of Illinois.
Thank you, Irma. I'd like to introduce our chairman, John Stassen, sitting at the front table here. Joe Antunovich, who you will hear from in a moment, who did the majority of the work on the presentation that you see on your table, our proposal. Joe Antunovich is vice chair. And Reuben Hedlund also is on our board. So those are our representatives today.
Those of you standing, we got a lot of seats up in front. So if you want to come and sit down, you'd rather stand. All right.
As evidenced by an editorial in this morning's Tribune, the Soldier Field train wreck, this issue is far from over with the kind of support we've had from the press. I want to explain just a little bit about LPCI's involvement in this issue. Our point of entry on this, as Irma told you, was the desecration of a National Historic Landmark. This is the highest federal rating that any structure can receive. It's a National Park Service designation. It is higher than just National Register status as an individual building. It's a National Register status of the highest and most nationally important category. The White House, Monticello, Mount Vernon. These are National Historic Landmarks, and Soldier Field has that same designation. When we first saw the the plan unveiled in the Tribune just 4 or 5 days before the legislature passed the funding for this, we looked at it optimistically but skeptically. The planning department and the mayor, I believe, felt that they had a solution. They could work on this project as 2 separate projects, rehabilitation of the old historic structure and the insertion of a new stadium, thereby satisfying all concerned. But the more we looked at the project, the more we studied the model, the more facts that we got on the project, the more objectionable it became. The insertion of a new stadium that, as Irma told you, towers 4 to 5 stories over the colonnade, and in fact leans out over the colonnade, as you can see in the images, virtually destroys the relationship of the historic structure, not only to the street, but to the sky, to the rest of the museum campus. It is something that the National Park Service agrees with us on, that it would in fact ruin the integrity of that historic landmark. Trying to be a modern and responsible preservation organization, we decided that if we were going to oppose this, we had to not just say no, we had to come up with an alternate proposal that would in fact present options for the mayor and for the city and for the Bears, which we did. Not only did we come up with a conceptual plan, actually Joe Antunovich came up with a conceptual plan for an alternate facility at Comiskey, but we also, with John Stassen's help, managed to substantiate through a federal court ruling from retired federal court Judge Frank McGarr that the funding, the $399 million in bond monies, could be transferable to the Comiskey Park site. Therefore, we not only presented a new idea, but we presented a new idea that we thought was bulletproof and valid. We have joined in with Friends of the Parks on litigation because we feel so strongly about this. We don't agree with every point of litigation on the second lawsuit, but we are in there fighting as strongly as we can. So,
Good morning. A concern that many of us have in the city where the dictum was to make no small plans is that we are indeed making a small plan. We're building a 20th century football stadium in the 21st century. And one only has to look beyond Chicago to see what other cities are doing for comparable amounts of money in comparable climates to see that we're making a mistake. We're making a mistake because we are limiting the use of the stadium to essentially 8 months of the year. For 3 or 4 months, it'll remain snowbound with ice, and it will not be able to retire the bonds easily because you don't have income from that time. Maybe a different alternative is to look at a stadium that has facilities to cater to events all year round. Just imagine if in Soldier Field you had one event every week for 52 weeks and a crowd in excess of 50,000, what that would do to the economic vitality of Chicago. Speaking of hotel rooms, restaurants, other ancillary effects of having a different kind of stadium. With the stadium we're proposing, we would never have a Super Bowl. A Super Bowl requires seating of 70,000, temperature of at least 50 degrees. We would never have an NC2A Final Four, given the facilities that are here right now. Another requirement for 50,000 spectators in an arena that obviously is enclosed. These are opportunities that we're missing. So I put to you, why don't we look and see what other cities around the world are doing under this premise, under similar premises, where you suddenly build an amenity that's an amenity instead of desecrating a national historic landmark. Look at a different site and a different kind of stadium for a comparable amount of money and build a stadium with Chicago architects an exciting new stadium that could last into the 22nd century. Tomas, you only have to go to Milwaukee. How many have been to a baseball game in Milwaukee, the new stadium? I count one hand. 90 miles north is a very, very good example of a solution. 50,000 seats in an arena that's openable. People actually stay to the end of the game to watch the roof open and close. You see the roof on top that's openable, and this is only for baseball. They've actually built an arena up there that is state-of-the-art and is actually a huge amenity, and left the lakefront alone. They built this off the lakefront, and then the different retractable natures of the field. These views of the stadium are quite fantastic, and I invite all of you to go there, and I'm somewhat disappointed that this example that sits just 90 miles north is so unvisited by Chicagoans, because it's really a fantastic facility. As an old rugby player, I grew up in New Zealand, retired at the ripe old age of 16 after playing 10 years. The home of rugby is Cardiff Arms Park in Wales. And it hurts me to say that Wales in 1999 hosted the World Rugby Championships and built a fantastic stadium, state-of-the-art stadium with a retractable roof. This seats 75,000 with a retractable dome, natural turf. The field's much bigger than an American football field. It is 75 yards wide, 110 yards long, can seat 75,000 people in a very comfortable environment with a retractable dome. This is one of the stadiums that is a stadium of the 21st century. You can see these images and what it does to the rebirth of a part of Cardiff that was languishing, quite a fantastic facility. The new Wembley Stadium in London, England, certainly having been brought up by Englishmen in New Zealand, it pains me to say that they have a vision of architecture and this impressive view here. This large structure is 1 kilometer in width. It's a huge facility, but it is a state-of-the-art facility with a retractable roof that will house between 80 and 60,000, depending on the configuration of the space. And if we were to build a stadium like this, move it off of the lakefront, we could then have many of the amenities that we're not getting. In fact, all-weather protection. Just imagine Britney Spears on the 15th of February while we have a storm outside playing in front of 80,000. These are the kind of, put me in charge of the scheduling of that. I'll do it for free. But you could imagine the kinds of facilities you could have. Even in London or in England, Liverpool, a very smaller stadium, still 60,000, a retractable dome. This has seats that move in different configurations, both for soccer and for cricket. And of course, in Portugal, in Lisbon, the Benfica Soccer Club has plans to host the 2004 European Cup. And this again is the architecture that they have come up with. These become symbols of the city, symbols of the life, the creative juices that are available amongst the architects and the developers within the city. And it also pains me, being from New Zealand, to say that the darned Australians have shown us a way here. The Colonial Stadium in Melbourne, which has cricket matches, and these are twice the size of the fields that you need for American football. This seats 80,000 with a retractable roof. And this was built in an area of Melbourne that the old wharf area, which totally regenerated this entire area. And then, of course, the views from Sydney itself with the Olympics last year. The Olympic Stadium that seats actually 118,000. They had 118,000 there earlier this year to watch Australia and New Zealand play rugby in one of the great rugby matches ever. I'm sorry to say that the Australians beat the New Zealanders with a try in the last 30 seconds. However, this stadium is, it's not fully retractable, but They actually retract the Teflon roof on either side over the seating areas to keep the spectators from rain. These images are captivating, and these images belong in a city that makes no small plans and makes plans of a bigger idea. In Japan, only the Japanese would make a stadium that's fully retractable, sliding seats for 60,000. But these are state-of-the-art stadiums that are being built. All of the seating is on tracks that are within a push button, 10 minutes, the stadium can reconfigure, and you see here the different reconfigured natures of the stadium. And even in the United States, although the architecture you'll see is somewhat passive compared to other countries, Bahlman Park in Phoenix, which I was shocked when I watched the 7th game of the World Series, they wouldn't retract the dome. I was trying to figure that out, and then it occurred to me they didn't want to interfere with the fireworks after the game, so the pitcher pitched in the rain, which was incredible to me. However, but you can see here the retractable dome in a climate which is quite different to ours, but again, for the temperature controls and all, they require this innovative stadium, which can be reconfigured. Ironically, this can also be reconfigured for football, but they've elected not to play football here. In St. Louis, the new Dome Stadium in St. Louis, several of you have probably been here, but this again has been a huge economic revitalization of this part of St. Louis with a stadium that's very contextual. Should have taken this one out. But you can see what this stadium did in its very contextual nature, much like the ballparks in Baltimore and San Francisco. If only we had done this with Comiskey Park 1, but perhaps the opportunity still exists there with Comiskey Park 2 as one of the sites for the new stadium. Reliance Stadium in Houston, a fully domed stadium, which is being constructed now. For this stadium is about $408 million. It is fully retractable, has all of the amenities that modern stadiums require. And then in Chicago, concluding, these are just some images we put together. This could be on the site near Comiskey Park, off the lakefront, when you're not constrained by an old historic national landmark. Many other things are possible. You can even name the stadium and recoup the $300 million over 10 years that you would lose otherwise. And these images are just meant to convey what Chicago architects could do if we opened this up, opened the siting up, was a little more broad thinking in our views of what this could be and where it could go. Thank you very much.
Why don't you share that microphone? I'll sit here and I'll be the host and moderator. You can answer questions too. You have a mic. Well, I know there are no questions on any of this. Oh, there are a few. Okay, well, we always start off with our Lawrence Spivak. Joyce Saxon, first question as always.
My question is for Irma. Irma, that judge who turned you down, who ruled against you at first, did he give an opinion? What did he say as a reason why?
Actually, we do not, which is why we are filing an appeal, we do not believe he answered the allegations. Our suit stated that the Chicago Plan Commission did not review the proposal for Soldier Field against the 23 purposes and policies of the Lakefront Protection Ordinance. You've got to see if the plan conforms with the 23 purposes and policies, and that the Plan Commission did not have facts to indicate that this did not violate the Lakefront Protection Ordinance. For instance, there was no Department of Environment report indicating that there were no environmental impacts to the lakefront if the stadium were built. There was no report in the presented to the Plan Commission. The CDOT, Chicago Department of Transportation, which normally presents a report and says, we've done a study, there's no problem with transit, there's no additional traffic, or traffic is reduced. In this case, even though there are 1,000 more parking spaces created in this plan, which means 1,000 more cars will be there on a game day looking for parking, CDOT did not present a report indicating that there's no negative impact on the lakefront. So throughout that was our issue. The judge did not respond to that. He, in a very strange way, and I don't go through it, but he went through the transcript basically and said, somebody here mentioned traffic. Didn't say whether it was good, bad, if this was an expert or not. Just the fact that the word traffic was mentioned was sufficient. Birds, one of the allegations is that the bird migratory flyway comes across this area, and birds will, a large number of birds will die crashing into the glass and steel structure. The fact that someone mentioned birds was sufficient to him, not the fact that this was an expert or that there were any findings that this would harm birds. So he just, to us, he did not address our allegations at all, and that's the basis of our appeal.
Well, there are falcons, there's eagles, there's cardinals. Moving on. Mr. Mammoth and Mr. Mazur, go ahead.
Yes, good morning. If you were to succeed in stopping the Soldier Field plan, what would the timeline be for the Bears to actually play a football game in a new stadium on 35th Street?
I'll start that, and I think our architects and David, we could all respond to that. Number one, there's an advantage to building a stadium at Comiskey Park. The Bears would not have to vacate, would not have to move to Urbana. Right now, they are planning to move for the 2002 and part of the 2003 years. In this case, they could continue to play in Soldier Field until a new stadium is constructed at Comiskey Park. So even if it took, months to develop a plan to get it approved, there would be no harm to the Bears because Soldier Field is in fine shape. It was rehabbed in 1994 for World Cup. John?
What would the timeline be?
Well, one of the good things is that the site at Comiskey is clear. You could start putting pylons in tomorrow if you wanted to. There would obviously be a delay in terms of developing a design, a concept, a design, working drawings. Joe, do you have any opinions on how long that might take?
A minimum of a year and a maximum of 2 years. So it depends on the motivation factor. Obviously, the Bears could continue to play in Soldier Field, but just our experience is the architects and engineers aren't allowed to proceed until 472 lawyers get their work done. So just a little. That would probably take 6 to 9 months, and then we would, the drawings and all should take approximately a year.
One of the other things that should be pointed out is that working within a historic structure like Soldier Field is a huge liability. And I think a liability that's not altogether completely known by the architects who are going to be doing this work. It is accepted that there's a $100 million premium on this project, cost-wise, to work within that existing historic structure. Now, once they get started with construction, they're going to have special cranes that will lift things over the existing structure. They don't intend to deconstruct any of Soldier Field. They have to work within it. And there may be significant delays created by the fact that they don't know what they're getting into in terms of this project of working with the historic structure. So there could be significant delays in the current project that we don't know about.
Mr. Mazur.
We don't have an answer to why the mayor's made this decision and why he is so firmly locked into it, despite all of the rational thinking, I think, and common sense that you can see in this. I don't have an answer. I don't know if anyone else has. I do want to add one thing to the previous discussion, not only time, but the issue of cost. This project right now is at $606 million. Stadia construction at a free and clear area where you can go ground up without the water table issue of Soldier Field and without the constraints that David spoke of, having special cranes to lift everything up over the colonnades, which is a very costly endeavor. The fact of the cost of a new stadium, I mean, in ranges with even retractable domes that are currently being built are in the area of, could be in as low as $400 million as opposed to $606 million. So that's an issue.
Back there. You gotta state your name. Please stand up. Well, Joe, this is the city club. Your rules here. Go ahead.
Sorry. I see board if you were to get your way, how would it affect the financing for the deal that's in place now? Is there a sunset provision from the Springfield and how would that?
No, one of the things that we did in the report, that a copy of which is on some of your tables there, is that we did get a bona fide and reliable opinion about the transferability of the funds. The legislation, the way it's written, indicates that the funding has to be attached to an existing sports facility. It also has to be land that can be owned by the Park District or the Illinois Sports Facility Authority. And with the Comiskey plan, Judge McGarr agrees with us that, in fact, there could be transferability of that $399 million to the Comiskey site without having to go back to Springfield, without any amendments whatsoever.
Questions? In the back, yes.
Charlie Crump. One quick question. Is the proposed stadium that you're thinking about artificial turf?
No, it is not. It is natural.
And then the second question, getting back to the vein of the question 2 questions ago, it is odd to see how the mayor has all of a sudden crafted a deal after 20 years, going back to his father and George Hallis, on trying to make something happen. Are there any other avenues, any other politicking, any other negotiations, lobbying that can occur outside of so that the mayor saves space, but yet somebody can see the light of that this is a far superior site?
Speaking for all of us, I think we have tried just about everything we could think of to try. There are a group of civic leaders in Chicago. Some of you may have read about the recent proposal by Larry Booth.
Is that the Brian Pritzker?
Yes, that's correct. Larry Booth came up with a scheme that doesn't suit all needs in terms of its location, but it, again, is another alternate scheme. Larry came up with a design. It's architecturally very exciting. He presented it to John Bryan and Cindy Pritzker. They loved the concept. It was sent to the mayor for him to look at, and as you may have read a week ago in the paper, that proposal was dismissed, summarily dismissed as well. And the editorial in today's Tribune addresses this political reality. For some reason or other, the mayor isn't even willing to listen to his closest friends.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Brent Cochran with DLK. Has anybody framed arguments for the day when Chicago makes another bid for the Olympics, the advantage of having 2 stadiums and a stadium with better transportation and the opportunity to create maybe an athletic campus versus the current scheme where we're just stuck with one?
Terrific question. I did compete in the Olympics, so I know. That aspect's not even been considered. We had a speaker at one of our other presentations, someone from Sports Illustrated, that it's a known fact that around all of the major leagues, Chicago has the worst stadia, the very worst stadia, prior to the improvements at Wrigley Field. And we've all been to Comiskey Park and viewed the games from the upper levels. That's not even been considered. The broader aspect of what are we left with for the $606 million. The proposal we're talking about with the retractable dome would be so that you could perhaps put in a wider field. You could not put in a regulation soccer field in the proposal that's planned, so that if you did have the final of the soccer matches at the Olympics, it couldn't be held because the stadium's not wide enough. A soccer field's 75 yards wide. It's a much bigger surface. So the idea that you could perhaps even locate the stadium somewhere else. We've proposed it here because we've connected the money to another facility, Illinois facility, so we don't have to go back to the legislature. If you step back even further and said, gee, what other venues are available in Chicago? I invite you to just drive west of the United Center, and it doesn't look like Chicago at all. That's had no economic benefit, that area, from the building of that stadium. But there could be a facility or location where you could start building a Chicago sports venue that had this facility and other facilities that could ultimately lead one day to bringing of the Olympics here.
The gentleman in the back that mentioned...
Some of us don't know who you are.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Don Hermanson. I'm the chairman of the executive board, Global 134, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and a few other titles that Dr. Green laughs at.
Yes.
The gentleman in the back referred to the mayor possibly saving face. Has any thought been given to the modification of the stadium and the park where the administration building used to stand? I don't think your plans, what you've shown here, does it justice. I was down at City Hall when you argued your case, or when you testified with the City Planning Commission, and that park is a beautiful idea. It is really very nice. Now, I know you have very strong feelings on Meigs Field. This is not being food for thought. The mayor has very strong feelings on it. I know you do, and your organization. Has any thought been given to possibly a trade-off? Let Meigs Field stay where it is, emphasize that beautiful park, move the stadium out. Right now, we have 66,000 seats in Soldiers Field, give or take. They're controlled by 6,000 people. I happen to be one of them. But if we get a bigger stadium that'll hold 75,000 people, now you have 10,000 seats that you can sell on game day. I grew up in the city and had never seen the Bears until I was 21 years old. And I've had my tickets for 41 years. So that, you see where I'm getting at? Just food for thought, okay?
Any comment?
Yeah, one interesting thing that is not, I think, generally known is that the new current proposal for Soldier Field will have 4,000 less seats in it than the current Soldier Field.
One more quick thing, if I may. The big stainless steel lip that faces the lake, has that ever been thought about, if we have to live with it, any thought been given to putting it on the other side?
It's actually on the west side.
It is on the west side.
It is
Thank
on the
you.
west side.
Don, in answer to Don's question about a trade-off, Friends of the Parks actually supports the restoration of Northerly Island, always has, and will continue to lobby for that in the future to a park. We do not support the use of the lakefront for private aviation, or for, in this case, the private corporation, the Chicago Bears. We think the optimum solution for the future of our city, carrying on from the brilliant planners we had a century ago, is to return Soldier Field to its arena and public use for general recreation, for you and for me, for our children, grandchildren, festival site, et cetera, and Northerly Island to a park, and economic development for a neighborhood that could benefit by a new stadium that could be used, if not for the Olympics, as this gentleman suggests, which was obvious. That's not an idea we had, envisioned, but certainly the idea of a Super Bowl and multiple uses of a retractable dome stadium.
The moderator has two quick questions, uncharacteristically butting in. Does Judge McGarr have any standing in any of this? He's a retired judge, isn't he?
Yes, he's a retired judge, but he's very well respected.
I'll say it again. Does he have any standing in the case?
Probably not legally. He has no standing, no.
That's an important point to make. It sounds like there's a judge that's involved in this. But my question was to Irma. What really, this whole thing, and I'll be honest with you, it's exciting to see I love all those things, all those click stuff. But what really interests me is with the Friends of the Park. The Soldier Field was a fiasco from the moment it was built. It's a white elephant. It wasn't built with any planning. It was built the same time as the Coliseum was built in LA and cost 5 times as much. It was a total political football with no architectural or no symbolic significance whatsoever. And now all of a sudden, people who want to make the lakefront pure are defending Soldier Field as if it was Monticello and Mount Vernon. I mean, that's like an insult to Mount Vernon and Monticello. I've been to both, and I never thought I'd put Soldier Field in a sentence with those 3 separated by commas. Could you respond to that?
Oh, absolutely, and easily. I disagree entirely. Let me go back, because you bring up a point, and I want to clarify. The planning for Soldier Field involved nothing short than the complete and total approval by the citizenry in 1920 and again in 1924. A referendum, a binding referendum was passed, taken to the citizens of Chicago. Would you spend $4 million to build a stadium in Grant Park? It was called Grant Park at the time, and it was called Grant Park Stadium originally. The citizenry said yes. That stadium was built with so much planning, so much thought, and a major competition by architectural firms of the day. The major architectural firms competed to build a state-of-the-art stadium at that location. They took into consideration the shed, the field, and the winning architectural firm, Halliburton Roche at the time, Halliburton Root today, submitted this thoughtful plan based on the nobility of the architecture of the buildings around there. They wanted to replicate Greek and Roman architecture. So, quite the contrary, it was done with complete approval by the citizenry, with great planning over years, with a competition, with a design that just was to inspire and to instill a sentiment when you saw that. And remember, it was open on the U, not what it looks like today, thank you, but what it looked like then. It was a U-shaped. You could walk into it. It had a quarter-mile track around it with a field inside. You could go there and run. You could go there and play ball, and you could have any number of events. And if you go back historically, something like, I think the largest number of people there were 117,000 people for the Ecumenical Council at one point. There were something like 101,000 for a boxing match. So the use of it has gone, I mean, a gamut of things, from concerts to festivals to boxing matches to skiing. And with just good event planners, we see that stadium returned to its original U with a quarter-mile track, with a field, could be used anywhere from 100 to 200 days a year and generate sufficient revenue for its operation. Thank you.
Irma, I really respect you, but I have to disagree. That stadium cost $8.5 million. It didn't cost $4 million. It cost 5 times more than the Coliseum. And there is not a Chicagoan alive who remembers walking in there and running around the track. But I admire your passion for defending it. And it was a white elephant from the moment. They had the Army-Navy game. It had a few other games, but it was a place where you couldn't see anything. That's why they had to cut it down a little bit. But I'm just amazed that you would defend that as, and I mean, maybe you have to, because I agree with you, this is a monstrosity, what they're trying to do to it, but it's just putting another monstrosity on part of a monstrosity. It's a terrible place. And I just think that the colonnades, if you want to defend those, I mean, I just think it's... Ed Kelly, at the head of the South Park Commission, who was involved in this, would be honored that you would be defending him as a planner. I'm just telling you. That's the same Ed Kelly who became boss of Chicago. I think it's great, and it's wonderful. So I love your answer. I just don't like the way you get there. Yes,
Paul, I have to challenge your assertion that there's
people who've ever done it, okay.
that there's no architectural significance to a Halliburton Roche colonnade such as we have at Soldier Field. The National Park Service goes through a very stringent series of criteria to establish National Historic Landmark status. It's a very, very important structure architecturally and historically.
All right, we just...
If a group of civic leaders, such as Cindy Pritzker and John Bryan, privately working to do everything they can to get access to City Hall through deputy commissioners. And believe me, there's been an awful lot of work done in the last couple of months on that level. If that doesn't work, I don't know what will work.
I think you keep working.
I lived for 22 years right next to Wrigley Field, 1 block away, and actually, I think that's a model of I mean, there are issues with it, but it was a wonderful amenity in our neighborhood. There was, as you know, tremendous economic development, restaurants and cafes and little trinket shops exist there and have. That does not exist at Comiskey, and the people that we have begun to talk to feel that they would benefit by economic development that they didn't get with the design of Comiskey Park. John's rendering with retail along the parking would begin to bring people on a year-round basis. They would see that as a positive to their community. So that's the initial, and that's one of the thoughts. And the second is that there is the Dan Ryan, you've got the Stevenson off, you've got 2 public transit lines that bring people in. And again, if you brought people in on a regular basis, some of the community there feel that that would be the advantage. That they would like to have more foot traffic. They would like to have more shops. They would like to be able to have their restaurants be used and their cafes and have more of those in their neighborhood. So they have seen it, again, this is just the preliminary, as an advantage to their neighborhood.
We did a similar presentation to what we're doing today about a month ago, also here, and we had a transportation consultant comment on the viability of the plan, and his feeling was that with the Dan Ryan, with the red line, with the green line, with the possibility of adding a metro station on the west, that the transportation, it might be touchy on days when there's a lot of activity, but it would be a lot better than Lakeshore Drive.
I think the neighborhood would benefit tremendously, and I think if you just saw what was being done and what has been done in Baltimore and in San Francisco and what's being planned in Philadelphia, of all places, where they're taking 6 blocks and they're putting the stadium in the middle and putting housing and retail and recreation all the way around it. This is a way in which we could invigorate this part of our city that has not been a benefactor of the 1990s, where other parts of our city have gone ahead. So this could be a tremendous economic benefit.
Lakefront, the public lakefront is 24 miles. We have 30 miles within the city, 24 of which is held in public stewardship for all of us to use. That represents that particular location, and let me just add that Chicago is the worst in terms of cities in the number of park acres per capita. Out of the top 18 cities in the United States, we are the lowest in the number of park acres per 1,000 population. We need 4 times the number of park acres that we have currently to meet Chicago's population numbers. This does not even begin to bring 7,000 acres, but it is one of the largest tracts of lakefront land that would be available for public recreation. That is reclaiming the 60 acres of parking lots that you go by that are nothing but concrete right now. Those, if you could visualize as being recreational fields or soccer, baseball, gardens, you name what could be placed on 60 acres of parking lots right now. The parking that we see under the across from the field would be underground, and all of it would be returned to its greenscape. I invite you to, the new Park District headquarters just moved to 541 North Fairbanks. When you go in their lobby, there is a mural. I have a chuckle at it because it's such a gorgeous mural, but it shows Soldier Field at 1924 or 1926 when it opened. And it shows this small arena surrounded by recreational space. It shows Northerly Island as recreational space. And this is the vision that we carry forth for this century, that we return it, not to drive by and look at the concrete, that Milwaukee does have a lot of concrete on their lakefront. We are trying to reverse that encroachment and find another solution for the Bears that'll work for them as well.
Okay. How about a big round of applause? This is outstanding. Irma and David, keep these because years from now, we want to prevent anyone from redesigning those because they are landmarks.
They are lovely.
And you have one-year membership in the City Club of Chicago. Some of you,
Oh,
very
excellent.
nice.
Thank you.
Meeting is